Oh yeah. Is it safe to come out yet? I said, is it safe to come out yet? Hi, I'm Steve Bradshaw, and in the next 55 minutes, I'm going to try and persuade you that IBM I services are the future of systems management on IBM I. Don't worry, you don't have to look at my face all the way through. Uh, we will have some slides and some useful information and some good demonstrations, I hope. So buckle up, come and join me on this ride. So you're here as part of the Practical SQL for Systems Management section. And if you have any questions, save them up because in a couple of hours' time, you'll be able to ask them to us direct. But let's get going. So, what's the agenda for today? Well, first question is, what are IBM I services? Then we're going to explain why you should use them, how you use them, how do you get them, and the all-important question, how much do they cost? Well, I'm sure you've seen an IBM presentation before, and they have their disclaimers. I'm sure you've seen a screen just like that. Well, this is my disclaimer. I have tried ever so hard to get the information that you're about to see and make it right. But please remember, opinions are like buttocks. We all have them. You're hearing my opinions, not Commons, not the Power Up organization, not the IUG, which is the user group to which I am the technical director, and certainly not IBM's. These opinions may not necessarily be right, and I know you have your opinions too. Please remember they not be right either. So with the best endeavors, I'm going to try and show you what I have learned, how I apply it. And one of the serious reasons why it might not be correct is that as time goes on, IBM adds new functions, and things that I say aren't possible today will be possible tomorrow. Well, with that in mind, let's get on going. I've got one more message for you before we go into the IBM I services. I think you'll notice, I guess you are the lucky ones. IBM I is a platform like no other. I've discovered 52 different IBM I user groups around the world so far, and I'm told there are more. They are literally a goldmine of information. Without these user groups, I would know a fraction of what I know now. I implore you, go out, look for them. They are full of wonderful people. You can drop in on a user group meeting. If you're going to Denmark, give Jesper a call over there. He's done that for me. Literally, turn up at one of his meetings, no cost. They'll even give you nice coffee and snacks. If you're further afield, believe it or not, this was this year. That's Dmitry over there. He runs a user group over in Russia. So I was in Moscow at the beginning of this year before the world went crazy. And that's the Bolshoi in the background. So not only can you learn about IBM I, but you can also learn about the insights of particular countries and their cities and wonderful, wonderful tourist attractions to go with them. So user groups, in short, they make you happy. They might even make you smarter, but I tell you, they will definitely make you sound smarter. If you disagree, then you can stop watching now. So, a quick question. Normally, when I'm doing this, I've got a live audience, and I would say, can I ask you a question? And I would gauge their responses. I would see if they were awake. I'd ask them to put their phones down. I would give them candy. Well, this is slightly more awkward now, so I'm going to imagine you all out there absolutely in raptures at the moment, waiting to find out what this question is. Well, the question is, have you heard of an IBM API? I'm sure the answer is yes. Right? Do you use IBM APIs? I'm sure the answer is, well, sometimes maybe, and they're probably built into my applications. So why are we asking about APIs? Well, an IBM I service really is the next generation of system API, application program interfaces. So still not a great definition, all right? You can use an IBM I service to manage or monitor your system. They're based on standard SQL statements. So if IBM has had APIs in IBM I for decades now, probably 3 of them, why would we need anything new? Well, they are useful for getting advanced system function information. Okay, old ones could do that as well. They were useful for getting low-level or hidden information. Okay, old ones could do that as well. And they were useful for giving you control of your systems in a way that's a bit more granular that the operating system command line didn't give you. Fine, well, it did that as well. So what was the problem with these old APIs if they actually worked? Why bother inventing something new? Well, they were designed 30 years ago. Now, that in itself doesn't make it a bad thing, but they were based on constructs that we had back then. Right? They often require complex RPG programs, which is great if you can write complex RPG programs. Now, me, I was a programmer in the 80s. If I was to take off this hat, you would see how little hair is up there. The reason I'm wearing this hat is you will get one hell of a glare without the hair. So, uh, the idea of making them in complex applications means that it is difficult to integrate them with new applications, particularly when you are starting to run short of RPG skills. So the other thing about the old APIs is it wasn't easy to get the results out. Okay, so you wrote this RPG application. What do you do with the output? Do you display it on a screen? Do you put it on a spool file? What if I want to have it in a web service? What if I want to email it to somebody? What if I want a PDF out of it? What if I want to put it into Excel? There's 101 things that you want to do with it. But you don't want to have to write an RPG program every single time. So different APIs also use different standards. You spend a lot of time, even in pre-Google days, looking at manuals, and these days looking for examples online. So that was the problem with the old APIs. So how did IBM address this? Well, let's look at an example. Okay, in the old world, if you wanted to know which jobs have a lock on a file, you'd have to use an API. There isn't an operating system command that does that right now. That's one of those things that may become a lie in the future. But right now, to the best of my knowledge, you can do a work obj lock and you can see who's using a file. But if I was to say which job is using which record in a file, you'd struggle to find the answer to that out. And if you don't struggle, please tell me how to do it. So there was an API called the QDBRRCDL API, which would tell you which job has a lock on which particular record in the file. So here is an example. It's 190 lines of beautiful code. Have you read it all yet? Well, okay. This is an example by Jamie F. shared on Code 400. Jamie, I hope you're watching. I hope you're at this conference. This is classic code. It's excellent. I've used it over the years and it still has its place. If you've got this in there, it's still going to work. But if you were starting from scratch and you didn't want to write 190 lines of code and integrate it into your particular system and then do variations of it for every single file, then you might want to use an IBM iService, because that's just one statement. You don't need to compile it. You just pop in there which schema, library, which table name, file that you're interested in, and what order you want them out in. Run the statement, and then you can see which job has a lock on which record. So in this example that Scott Forsty has put out for us, you can see there are locks on the first 10 records, and you can see the job name. In this case, it's the same job that has got a lock on all 10 records. Simple, no compilation, fast, very easy, very flexible. It's just a modern way of getting answers to your questions for your systems. An IBM iService. We're going to see loads more examples, but let's just move on for a little while. You'll see this link come up time and time again, ibm.biz db2 for iServices. That will give you links to loads more information about IBM iServices from people way cleverer than me. So why should you use IBM iServices? Let's summarize it again. It's simpler. There is less programming. There's less compilation. It's easier to put them into a script. You can give them to people who aren't RPG programmers and actually get them to understand how to use it. They're faster. No code, less code, no compilation. And you get more information back. So that rows that you saw returned earlier, not only is that displayable in a nice column format there, well, you could pipe those into a file. You could actually hit the right click and you could save them out. We'll cover more of those examples later, but it's a little bit more flexible in how it works. And of course, you can get access to data from other systems, not just the one you're connected to, but anywhere that you have a connection onto via, TCP/IP. Another example, one that I happen to use all the time, because I'm a systems guy by day, is checking patch levels. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the work PTF group, but it's a bit of a pain, and it's the first step that we always go through when we're trying to work out if a system is up to date or not with its patch levels. Now, this could be better. I mean, it would be particularly better if the two screens you see there on the left and on the right, this screen and this screen, were actually all displayed at the same time. But no, you spend F11 going backwards and forwards between them. Well, that would be nice if we could put all those on one screen. But it'd be even better if it told you whether the levels that you can see installed. So, I've got this 99776 level 1, which is the high availability for IBM. Is that the latest one? I mean, it's 1, so chances are there might be a 2. But this level down here with the cumulatives, well, there's sort of loads of digits in there. So is there going to be a newer one than that? It'd be really nice to know. And if you try and do that process manually, then you pretty much write this down, then go off to the IBM website, log in with your credentials, prove that you've got the access to a system, and then start to literally cross-check each one of the entries on here, and there may be 30 or 40 of them, to work out whether there's a newer version, and then you can start to download them. Well, if you wanted to do this in an easier way using an IBM iService, you could just use that single statement you see there. What that'll do is it'll run on your system and it will collect the information you saw before. Okay, so far so good. Then it will use the connection to the internet on your server, go to IBM Central, automatically figure out what the latest versions of those PTFs are, and then report the answers back to you. So there's a table there. It's going to be a little unclear, but let me just point it through in the left-hand side there, because it's a little blurry. That left-hand one tells you whether there's an update available and whether you've got the latest level. It gives you that group name, it gives you the description, gives you the level that you've got installed, the new level that's available and when it became available, and a few more details as well. So you're thinking, well, that's great, because literally that process would have taken me 30 to 60 minutes, and I do this all the time. It's one SQL statement. It checks your system, then goes and checks with IBM Central and gives you an answer. The statement took 6 seconds to complete when I ran it earlier. If you want, I'll do that in a second. I'll actually go and run an example of this, and we'll see whether my system's up to date. And it gives you that highlighted information of when there's a patch available. Again, you can right-click and save this and just drop it into your documentation, put it into a spreadsheet. It really makes life easier. So I said 6 seconds. Let's see if that sounds about right or not. Let's go and have a quick look. Right, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to run an IBM iService. So let me just run an SQL script against the machine. Now, I could copy and paste it from the screen you saw earlier, but there's these wonderful things called examples. We'll come back to those again later. I'm going to type in their PTF, and it's going to tell me about PTF currency. Okay, so I'm going to use that example. So I've had to type literally nothing. And I'm going to ask it to go off and run. That statement is executing on my machine, turning around, going to IBM Central, and coming back. You know what? That was probably a little bit faster than 6 seconds. IBM's clearly on a go fast this evening. And so you can see there, the levels are all current on this machine, because I'm a good boy and I patch my servers, and I can see when they became available. But should any become available, you'll see that change on the side there. Let's get back on course. So that's an example of an IBM iService that checks your machine and another machine that may or may not be IBM i. Another pro tip, so that's automatic checking. From 7.3 onwards, you could actually get the PTFs to automatically download onto your machine, and then you just do a special IPL when you want to apply them. Splits the audience, that one, but if you've got a test machine and you just want to keep it up to date, that's a nice feature to have. So 7.3 onwards, there is the ability to automatically download PTFs, and then you do a special type of IPL when you're ready, and it will apply them. So how do you use IBM iServices? Well, you can do them from Start SQL, but it's not recommended. Not because that's not going to work. The problem is with Start SQL is you're still stuck on that tiny little screen. And you saw some really nice answers earlier spreading out. So if you've only got your 80 columns, 130 columns wide, you're not going to get a lot of information. So personally, I would avoid it. The way you're going to see me using it is inside the ACS client, and I know my colleague Steve in the next presentation is going to spend more time talking about that. You can do it from the IBM iAccess for Web, if you like. One of the nice features about that is you can save statements. You can do it from within RDI if you're a developer. My favorite, I'm a big fan of the Navigator Nav for I interface. That's the GUI-based, browser-based interface for managing your system. There's some examples in there, and I'll show you some of these. But if you've got an ODBC or a JDBC driver that you use, so whatever BI tool that connects up, if you can run an SQL statement, you can consume these IBM I services and get your answers back. So you saw me use Scott's favorites, and you'll hear Scott and Tim in this event talking a lot more about ACS and particularly about the IBM Run SQL scripts. This tool in here looks like, oh, well, it's just something that can run an SQL statement, but you'll find loads more. They've put a lot of effort in there to make it format correctly, to do prompting. More on that later. So big up for that one. This was the web service. So, this is starting to look a little dated. When they bought it out, it was absolutely fantastic because you could actually have your SQL wizard that would build your statements for you and save them away. But if you have it, it still works. This is my favorite at the moment because it actually is a great way of figuring out what IBM I services are there. So if you go to your system, IP address or name, colon 2001, log in, then expand system, click on IBM I services, or if you can't be bothered to do that, just type in IBM I services in the search. You'll get a list of 177 current IBM I service examples. 177 service examples that you can then take and customize. So it's a great way of discovering what is possible in this new realm. Okay, moving on. So how do you get these IBM I services? I've said they're really good, and you can see you can use them with the ACS client. Well, the truth is, if you've got IBM I 7.1 or newer, and I really hope that all of you have got 7.1 or newer, preferably much newer, then you've got these services. They're literally baked into the machine. They've been adding them since 7.1 and adding new function after new function after new function. This is why it's useful to keep going to this website periodically after every sort of major PTF release, so twice a year when we get the new TR levels, to see what new functions have been added. So, do PTFs help with IBM I services? Well, in a word, yes. PTFs now play a bigger issue than ever. Now, not just with IBM I services, but also with performance. We are seeing improved performance as well as the security patches going on with every single PTF TR level that's put on there. So if you're not patching your systems at least once a year, shame on you. If you're doing it twice a year, I think you're wonderful. If you're doing it more often than that, you are literally a god in my books. But since the 7.1 refreshes, we've been having not just bug fixes, we're getting new functions and lots of them. I haven't got time to talk about that in this particular event, but I'm sure other people will be telling you about some of the new functions that have come along in the latest TR levels. All right. The other thing to remember is just because T7.4 is where the latest stuff is going on, IBM is very good at looking after N-1. So a lot of the stuff that is being written in 7.4 is being PTF'd back into 7.3. So even if you're on 7.3, it is worth staying up to date with your PTFs. You will get new functionality. Okay, the same was true with 7.3 back into 7.2. All right, so these PTFs, I was telling you about the fact that new functionality comes along all the time. How do you find out what this new functionality is like? Well, if you go to that website that I gave you the link for, you start to see different groups of IBM I services. So they've put them together in different lumps. So you can see the example there with the PTF services there and the security services underneath them. And they'll give you examples for each of these, as well as telling you whether they were shipped in the base part of the operating system, whether you needed a particular PTF level to actually have this functionality. So if you find that you're at 7.3, for example, and you can't find the firmware currency, then you just need to make sure that your SF703 is at level 15 or higher, and then that functionality will work. Hope that makes sense. So PTFs do help, and that website I gave you will tell you how you find out what services are available and get examples of them. All right. So let's get back to some more basic examples, because I'm still trying to sell you on the fundamentals, the bread and butter of this. One of the most common questions we get asked by an auditor is, who are your super users, your God users? And I don't know about you, but my definition of someone who's a God user is someone who can access any data on the system. And if you've got all obj, then you can literally access any of the data that's on the system. How you access it might be a bit more difficult, but if your user has all obj, you literally have access to all objects. So In the past, you'd have probably used a command like that. Print user profile. And you get the special autinf and go with the special authority all obj. And that would give you a report that looks something like that. And you'd say, there you are, Mr. Auditor. There are my users that are super users on the system. And you'll see most of them start with a Q, so they belong to the operating system. And then I've got 2 super users that do my work. And he would say, thank you very much. Chances are you might have actually been fibbing. Why? Well, let's see if IBM iServices could give you a better answer than this classic IBM i 5250 command. Well, it's not a promising start, is it? That's quite a long statement. It's definitely a lot longer than that one we saw back here, which was just one single line. So I hope it's worth it. Well, remember, you're not going to have to type this in every single time. You'll be able to actually take them from examples. You'll be able to save these away. You'll be able to put them in programs. But let's see why it might be worth the extra effort. Well, when I run this one, I get a very similar looking screen. In fact, arguably, you might say I've got less information there than here. Well, all that information is there, but it's in columns off to the side. All right, so still not convinced. So why is that better than that? Well, the simple truth is, if you've been paying attention, there's an extra user on there. Look at them side by side. Same machine, there's an extra user profile there called surprise. It does not show up in the print user profile information. Is there a bug in the operating system? No. Computers are just like teenage children. They do exactly what you persuade them to do, not what you want them to do. So in this case, you said in the IBM i5250 command, I want a list of all the user profiles that have a special authority of all obj. Okay, and that's exactly what you got. What you get from the IBM i service is a list of all the users that have the special authority that comes from all obj, plus any that inherit it from their group profile. So this user called surprise is not got the special authority directly given to it in the user profile, but it inherits it because its group profile, in this case Roten, actually has the authority. So it's a better answer. One of the other things that can be very difficult in this world of GDPR, now a lot of you, I believe, in this conference are actually going to be in the Americas. So technically, you might say, well, the GDPR, that's a European disaster. And as you've probably gathered from my accent, I am part of that European disaster. Well, yes and no. Yes, it's a European directive, but no, it's not just applying to Europeans. If you transact with anyone in Europe, then you are obliged to honor the GDPR rules. Now, finding GDPR data is tough. What is an example of GDPR data? Well, anything that's personal and that could be decoded to assign whom you are. So a passport number, a social security number, I get that, NI numbers as we call them. But even an address could be deemed that way. And finding that data on your machine can be quite difficult, especially if you're trying to find all the copies of it. So you might have inconsistent field names where your social security number is called, social on one or SOSH and NO on another, and you don't easily find them all. You might have multiple copies of the same data, in test libraries, in save files that you've forgotten about. There might be millions of objects on your system that need to be analyzed, so finding them all can be a little tough. So where do you start? Well, technically, this is not an IBM iService, it's actually a system table, but it's exactly the same principle. You can use a piece of SQL to go and ask the system for some information. Now, in the example I've got there, I'm just basically using address, but just imagine it was your social security number or your passport number, whatever's relevant to you in your business. And you just slide that into that little bit of text there. It will go away to your system and it will look through every file table in every library schema on your system and tell you when you've got a field that has that. Now, it tends to, what I do, rather than looking at the field name, I look at the description you put on there because that's more likely to have it. So in this example, an address is something that is sensitive under the GDPR. So particularly if it was your home address. So let's just take an example of that. Let's see if we can make that work. So I'm going to grab that statement. And I'm going to run an SQL statement up here. So we had that example in. Let's clear all that off. And we'll paste in that statement and we'll run it. Now, I think you'll agree that was pretty quick. This is a list of every library and table. So when you see table, then we've got the field name there. That has address in the text. So we could start to drill it down a bit further. But just imagine if that was social security number or credit card number or whatever you think is sensitive. You could start to find extra copies of sensitive data on your machine much more quickly. Just a tip, just a tip. So let's get back into this again. Restart that page there. That tip came courtesy of a good friend of mine called Guy Mamara, who is at Rousselaine. Some other examples of things you might want to look at: blood type, credit card number, zip code, social security number, passport. I think you get the idea. All right. So by this point, I'm hoping I've got your interest that it's easy and it's fast. You don't have to be an RPG programmer or a COBOL programmer. You don't really need to be a programmer anymore. I personally stopped programming over 20 years ago, but I can hack SQL with the best of them. And usually I take credit for SQL that other people have written, and Google is your friend when that happens. So if you wanted to find out more, remember, go back to this link, the IBM Biz DB2 for iServices, and you'll get the latest information. I did a quick check before starting to record this particular session. There were 110 different services. That's just not 110 questions. That's the different types of service that you could ask questions of. Heaven knows you could ask each of those services thousands of questions. This is IBM's strategic way forward. When they bring new features, they bring new IBM iServices in order for you to actually do the system administration. Okay, there were 14 new categories added in just the last 12 months, and there were 19 categories added in the previous 12 months, just to give you an idea of how fast this is moving forward. All right, so what categories of service are available? What sort of questions could you be asking? Well, top one there, IFS services. So you want to find out about the usage statistics on your IFS. Oh, that's interesting because that's not easy to do. PTF services, you saw an example of that earlier. Security services, you saw an example of that earlier. There are plenty more. If you get into looking at authority collection services for working out what security level you need on your machine, then you really need to be looking at that IBM service to go alongside with it, because that'll allow you to summarize it and understand the information much more easily. Message handling services, so that's relatively new. You can now start to query message queues and then work on the answers from that. And well, I won't go into every single one of these, but I think you get the idea. You know, you've got work management services to see what's going on in your system, communication services to see what TCP information or communication information is going on, spool file services to see which users are using the spools, okay, and on and on. I'm going to give you some more examples. So it's about changing habits, right? If you were used to using the work obj or dispobjd, then you might want to start looking at some of these statistics over on the right-hand side here. If you're interested in doing a retrieve directory infamy, then you want to use some of those network statistics, the IFS statistics we talked about earlier. If you're interested in finding out what job information is going on, now I don't just mean work active job. Work active job is great for a summary of what's going on at that point in time. But if you want to really know what's going on, digging down under the covers, and I mean more than just putting a 5 next to it and then taking option 30 to see all of the stats. You can get information in these services that you cannot get through the green screen. Then an IBM iService is definitely for you. If you want to start actually getting much more information about jobs and network communications, then again, NetStat is just not going to cut it on a green screen. You've got such a small amount of real estate to see what's going on. It's almost impossible to visualize the data you need. It's much easier when you can blow it out on the big screen and pipe the results into a database file or into a spreadsheet. So the list goes on and on and on. And if you think that there is an IBM service that IBM has not yet written, then let me know, let Scott know, or write an RFE for it. IBM is always looking for new reasons to create a new service. So this is all well and good, but how do you work out what services are available? How do you know where to start? Well, I gave you a little bit of a clue earlier. You can do it in the Navigator fine, but there's way more workable examples built into the ACS client. You saw me use this earlier, this insert from examples. What Scott and the DB2 guys have done is thought, okay, here's a common set of examples as a starting point for just about any circumstance. And every time there's a new version of the ACS, they up the number of examples in there. Now, the top tip here is there's a fantastic search facility. You may have seen me use it earlier if you were paying attention, but in the example we see here, we wanted to know about examples that are to do with storage. So in the search, we just type in storage, and anywhere where storage comes into the description or into the description inside, we get a list that comes to us. So the example here, we use storage, and Scott's gone on to show us here the top 10 consumers of disk by user. And there's an example. So to get this, you click on the insert from example, then you type in what you're interested in, then you select insert. It really is that simple. So let me go and show you that all object example from earlier. Okay, so let's go back onto my machine, right? You blank out what's there. You click the insert from example. Everyone see that? Right, what am I interested in? So I'm interested in all obj. Okay, that's great. So I select that, click insert. It puts the SQL statements at the top of the screen. You see it's there. Double click it, go and run it. Got my answer. Want to keep that? Great. I'm going to right click, going to save the results. Okay, all obj on John 7.4. Press enter, it saves it out. And now I've got a nice shiny spreadsheet, and I can go and embed that information wherever I want into whatever report I want. Really is that simple. Okay. I hope you're starting to see that this really is the future of IBM systems management. All right, so I'm going to give you some other examples now of how you can use the machine. The insert from examples that you just saw, great, that's wonderful. After a while, you're going to be creating your own examples. Once you think that's, you've tuned one or created a whole new SQL statement of your own, then just save it back as your own example, and then yours will be included in the list that you saw earlier. Other people will cover that in more detail, but just know those examples are not static. You can influence them, you can add your own, you can tailor them. Forgive me for a second, I need a sip of juice. All right, one of the newer things you've been able to do with IBM iServices is look at journals. Hallelujah! Who likes looking at the diskjourn command? Well, if you, the person who said yes, you're a sadist, right? Because that diskjourn command, it's so verbose in its answer, and B, you tend to have to about 3 different journals, stitch them all together, and then get some more information to make any sense of it whatsoever. Well, IBM has made it easier to read and easier to interrogate using the new IBM iService for journals. Now, the one that I like is to do with the audit journals, but you can do them with databases. Again, I'm a systems guy, so I'm usually looking at the audit journal. Much easier to visualize data, much easier to export data. That same save to Excel that you saw me use before, that's available for this as well. It's much easier to subset and select and find, what ifs and ands and likes in there. And you can actually then use that SQL service to directly turn around and integrate it with your SIEM. So if you don't know what a SIEM is, then that's good. That means that you're not being forced for auditing. If you do know what a SIEM is, then you will realize just how much of a pain it is to actually send your information to a SIEM. Now, the SIEM providers, okay, SIEM is a security system that is nice and system-wide, if you like. So you can get information from your networks switches, you can get information from your firewalls, from your database servers, from IBM. And these SIEM solutions, they always say, hey, send me all of your data. And that's because they tend to charge by the megabyte that you send to them. So the more specific you can make the data, the less you'll get charged and the better the information you get back. The IBM iService allows you to do that. So here's an example, a very simple one. I just want to know Who's been changing user profiles in the last 24 hours? Got my statement there. Let's see if we can run that statement. Who's been making changes to user profiles? So go back to our run statement, clear everything off that's in there, paste that in, run our statement. Okay, there have been 2 changes to user profiles in the last 24 hours. If I just wanted it to be the last 4 hours, I could change it from 24 to 4. If I wanted it to be in the last 7 days, I could change it to 7 and days. You notice we're not having to do calculations anymore. If this was one of those API programs I was telling you about, the first thing you would do is write a program that says, right, retrieve the current date and time. Now, run this routine to actually take 7 days or 4 hours away from it. None of that. Database does it. Pseudo English. Fantastic. So change that. And in this case, the answer is exactly the same because I only span out this partition a few hours ago. All right, so you can ask all sorts of questions. It could be who's had a problem logging in, who's made changes about a certain type of object, who's been deleting things, who's been creating things, who's, well, you know what? I'll give you some more examples. Let's actually go back to the presentation because there are plenty more examples in there. All right. So you can now view journals. It's made life a lot easier. Some examples of my favorites that Scott's shared with us, things that are easy to do with an IBM iService that are pretty difficult, if not impossible to do with a 5250 command line. So if I IPL a box, what impact is it going to have on the PTFs? Yep. So this single statement here will tell me, if I run it, are there any PTFs that are going to get applied or changed at the next IPL of the box? Now, as a system administrator, if it's my own box, I tend to know what's going on. When I go in as a consultant and someone says, right, I plan to do this work and that work, what effect would it have if you're going to put these PTFs on? Well, the first thing I want to know is, are there any PTFs still waiting to go on? Are there any little unexpected presents I'm about to get? You get an answer very quickly there. All right, something a little bit more for those people who've got HA, logical HA. Which remote journals are the most heavily used? Right, which remote journals are the most heavily used? So if you use that statement there, it'll start to rank them for you. How hard or easy do you think that would be to do from the command line? Well, it's not impossible, but I tell you what, it'd be blooming difficult, but that gives you the answer in literally seconds, effortless. Even more obscure, which of those remote journals fell behind in the last week? This could uncover communications problems you've got or peak burst information that you've got. So what this is telling you is that I've got my system A and my system B, and I'm using journaling. So I've got some logical replication tool in there that's taking the journals, changes on my system, and sending them to my target. But every now and again, it's getting behind. Now, maybe this is getting behind in the middle of the night, and by the time I come in the morning, it's caught up. You might say, why do I care? Well, what if your system was to crash in the middle of the night and it got a 3-hour backlog that you didn't know existed? And you've been swearing to the boss that, yep, it's absolutely up to date. I check it every morning and it's literally a fraction of a second behind. It's effectively real time. Oh, except when I run the overnight routines. So information like that, really easy to find with an IBM iService. Other examples, it's kind of hard to figure out what's a list of group profiles. And I've always struggled with this, right? This, you can see a list of the user profiles on there, but just give me a list of the group profiles on the system. You can do it with the navigator interfaces, but not so easy from the command line. Well, there you go. There's an SQL statement that'll do that for you. This particular one, which users are having trouble signing on, I honestly use this as an icebreaker. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a greatest of icebreakers, but when I go to a new site and I'm working with the IT department for the first time, I'll say, I am going to predict that I know the users that cause you the most aggravation. And they say, okay. I say, which ones are the biggest pain in the posterior? I'm going to tell you, right? And if you win, you're going to go make the coffee. Sorry, if I win, you're going to make the coffee. And so you run that statement, and what that shows you is the users that can't type in their password correctly. Now, if a user can't type in their password correctly, the chances are they're doing other things wrong as well. So that one, kind of handy. To be honest, that one about the users as well, if you do find people who really aren't typing their passwords incorrectly, maybe you want to give them a bit more education. Talking of users who don't tidy up after themselves, this is where the users are, again, like teenage children. They're very good at creating mess, but very bad at cleaning up after themselves. So this statement here, a little longer, will give you the top 10 consumers by user ranked on your system. So which 10 users have the most storage allocated to them? Now, if this is to do with orders and invoices, then I'm very proud of that user. If you've given them a network share and they just dumped a load of rubbish in the IFS, not so proud of that user. Okay, so this is a slightly different angle on there. Consumers of temporary storage. Now, those of you who aren't familiar with temporary storage, just bear with me for a moment. It is that hidden area where IBM I works its magic under the covers. Temporary storage is a wonderful thing. It is the Q temp for the operating system, but it is bloody awful when you run out of it. It can really cause performance problems. So this sort of query that you're seeing there can really help find the answers to questions that would be difficult to find out otherwise. Taking temporary storage one stage further, what if it's not a user that's causing a problem? What if it's a connection between one of your other databases? So in this example, it might be a DRDA connection from another one of your IBM ILPARs, or maybe it's one of the SQL data warehouses you've got going in. So use these sorts of questions to give answers to those, these sort of questions to get those sort of answers. All right. What data was deleted from a file in the last week? What data was deleted from a file? You really can track that sort of information. So if we are now working with database journaling rather than audit journaling will just tell you that the file was deleted, not what particular data records were deleted from it. Well, statement like that, and Scott Forsey is going to give you some more information on that. We'll give you that sort of detailed answer. This is halfway to temporal storage, but it's not quite temporal tables, okay? Comparing the PTFs on two different machines. Before you saw me compare the PTFs on my machine with IBM God Central to see which is the, if there's any new fixes. Well, with that statement you see there, and yes, I know it's quite a long one, then you can compare the PTF levels of two different LPARs, whether on the same physical machine or different physical machines. Doesn't matter in the slightest. As long as they can see one another via a TCP link, you can then make the comparison. All right, new stuff. I mentioned before that you can, from 7.4, you can start to look at message queues. This is useful because you can start to look for problems, be they in your applications or be they like this, where some idiot who installed your system forgot to put the license keys in. So now you have a shiny new Power 9 running 7.4. Woohoo! In 69 days, it's not going to be running so well when the machine starts to shut down. So being able to look for particular strings in message queues can be very, very useful. Object statistics. So for those of you who've been looking after systems for a while now, you'll know that it's really quite easy to figure out which libraries are consuming the most disk space. And you can even track changes quite quickly week on week to see whether more stuff has been put into those libraries and change the ranking of them. Now, the sort of retrieve disk information, print disk information has been quite good at that. But it was very, very poor at giving you information about the IFS. So qsys.lib, libraries, yes. IFS, rest of it, not so much. Well, IBM has fixed that with a service. So now you can run a command like this one, which will say, right, I want you to tell me which is the largest single object in the IFS. So this is an individual file. So in this case, we've got this very large image at the top there. Fine. So that's individual things. So show me the biggest objects in the IFS. You might want to do it a different way and say, okay, show me the users that are using the most space in the IFS. So we got, in this case, that statement, and you can see again, it's Scott with a directory, and you can see the size of the directory. What about probing particular directories? Tell me the directories that are consuming the most space. So those three, individual objects, users, or directories. So you can go at it in any one of those three directions or a mixture of them. This is now built into your machine. You're not going to be running long collection processes and then analyzing processes. Before, you used to have to run a process that literally pulled all this information out, put it into database files. That in itself could take minutes, if not hours, depending on how busy your system was, and then start to analyze it. This is real-time information. Ask it and it will tell you. You can now do the same for spool files. Who amongst you has users that delete their own spool files? Congratulations, the person at the back. I bet the rest of you are going, no, I've got loads of people who leave spool files all over my environment. They're a right pain. Well, now we can start to do it based on users, based on individual spool file data. And so we can see how big they are. So this has been PTF'd back to 7.3. There are other OutQ services that existed at 7.2, but this particular spool file data by user is not one of them. So the all-important question, right? They're easy to use, right? They give you the answers to questions that normal 5250 commands can't. So they must cost a fortune, right? They must be super expensive. They're free, okay? They are literally built into your machine. You literally have to do nothing to use them. Just start using them. If you want to get more of them, please PTF your machines. If you want to get lots more of them, make sure that you're running newer versions of the operating system. But they are free. I should say free. You pay for the operating system, so no extra charge. Okay, where do you start? Well, I've mentioned this a couple of times. I can't stress it enough. The insert from the examples is the best place. Scott Forsty and Tim Rowe will be doing sessions on ACS, and DB2 services will come into that. I know my good friend and colleague Steve Pitcher is going to follow me, and he's going to give you a lot more detail on how you move this forward. So if you watch Steve and then go on maybe to see something that Tim and Scott Forsty have done, I think you'll be in a really strong position. But once you get going and once you see these simple examples, you'll realize that between the insert from examples and Google, you are golden. Now, normally at this point, we'd start a discussion. And I'd say, have any of you got any questions? And we'd have a good old chat about examples of how you might do this and how you might do that. So I appreciate it's really difficult in these strange times when we can't be in a room together. So if you do have questions, the way we're going to deal with it is after Steve's session, which follows mine, then there'll be a 30-minute live interaction where you can ask those questions. So jot them down, have a think about them. No question is too complicated, and believe me, no simple question will be dodged either. We like simple questions as much as the complicated ones. And if we can't find the answer straight away, we'll try and find someone who can for you. So what happens if you want to know more? Well, yes, we've got this education, and that's the point. You're going to find out plenty more across the whole Power Up agenda. But if that doesn't work for you, and if Steve's session that follows me doesn't work for you, and if Scott's session that he does with Tim doesn't work for you, then this website that I've mentioned, go over there and check out the IBM.biz DB2 for services. There is plenty of examples on there that'll help you drive forward. I'm sure you've got local business partners, ISVs, that will help you out, the guys who you'd normally go to for your application support. If not, you can actually log a call about these with your local IBM support community. Now, don't put it down as a Sev one, just say it is a question only. But if you want to know the answer to something, that's what you're paying your Swarmer for. This is base part of the operating system. So feel free to actually talk to them, engage with them, and ask some what if questions. They're really friendly guys, and they quite like it when you're asking them questions that aren't to do with the whole house burning down scenario. So again, engage with the community. The user groups, going right the way back to the beginning. You're obviously interested in being a user group, so you're part of the common umbrella to be actually where you are now. I'm sure there are local user groups where you can engage and chat with people about that. So feel free to do that. And if you don't, then go to my user group, which is I-UG, the I user group, I-UG.co.uk, and you can ask questions on the forums. And I also write a technical blog each month, so you'll find more information there. But other technical blogs are available. Steve Pitcher, who's going to follow me, has got a fantastic one in the iTech Soul blog they put out there. The Systems Magazine's guys do it. The IBM guys do it. There is a wealth of information out there. What I need from you is just to take a start. Find one or two questions that you find difficult with a 5250 at the moment and create an IBM I service to do it for you. Then you can give it to non-IBM I users. If you've got network administrators that look after your Wintel or your Lintel estates, then if you give them a series of SQL statements and say, well, run these and then just pipe the answers over here, they'll do it. They won't think twice about it. If you're using a SEAM solution, you can add these custom SQL statements in there. If you're using some sort of BI tool that gets you business information out of your environment, then add these SQL statements into that BI and give you system information. If you can't be bothered to do any of those things, you should all be entitled to at least the basic version of web query. Now, web query has a dashboard function built into it. The smallest user amongst you, you can have a PO5 with just a 5-user license, and you'll still have 2 web query licenses. When you load web query, then there is an option to actually build a dashboard built in that will consume these top IBM I services. And there's a little red book or red piece that goes with it that explains exactly how it works. It's a great insight into both web query and also looking at these dashboards. So with that in mind, I hope you'll find that it was useful. I hope you'll find that IBM I is the future of system administration on IBM. And I really thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I look forward to your questions in an hour's time. I can see that I'm just a couple of minutes ahead of schedule. So that means you've got slightly longer for your coffee. So with that in mind, thank you very much. Stay safe, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Cheers.